The neon sign buzzed like a dying insect, painting the snow in sickly red light. McDonald's, it blinked, the M flickering like a failing heartbeat. I shoved my hands deeper into my jacket pockets. The lining was torn, letting the December cold sink its teeth straight to my ribs. My breath came out in ragged clouds, dissolving into the stink of fryer grease and wet pavement. That's when I saw him. A heap of matted fur curled against the restaurant's back wall, half buried in the shadow of an overflowing dumpster. At first I thought it was just another trash bag left out in the storm. Then the shape moved. A slow, shuddering rise and fall. A dog. Not the kind you see in pet stores or parks. This one was all edges, hips jutting sharp under his patchy coat, ribs pressing against skin stretched too tight. His fur was the color of old newspaper left in the rain, clumped with dirt and something darker. Ice, maybe. Or blood. I should have kept walking. But then, a sound. Not a whine, not a growl. Just the faintest click of claws on concrete as he lifted his head. Our eyes met. His were the color of puddles after a gasoline spill. Dull gold, swimming with exhaustion. But beneath it, something flickered. A spark. A question. You too? The wind howled between us, carrying the stench of rotting ketchup packets and the metallic tang of snow. His nostrils flared, testing the air. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Somewhere behind me, a car alarm wailed, its red light reflecting in his pupils like tiny wildfires. He didn't beg, didn't cower, just stared, his chin resting on his paws like a king too tired to hold up his own crown. A thin line of drool froze on the concrete beneath his muzzle. 3 feet away, a half-eaten burger lay trampled into the slush. Bun soggy, lettuce black at the edges. Untouched. My throat tightened. I knew that look. The kind that said I'd rather starve than eat your pity. A shudder ran through him, not from the cold, but from the effort of staying upright. His front leg was tucked close to his body, the fur matted stiff. Injured. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just hungry. He was broken. For a wild second I thought about kneeling, about reaching out. But my fingers remembered the last time I'd tried that. The snap of teeth, the sting of betrayal, the way my 4th-grade teacher had sighed and said, "Some strays don't want saving, Jake." The dog's ear twitched at a sound I couldn't hear. His gaze slid past me, toward the alley's mouth where the streetlights buzzed like angry wasps. A shadow moved there, a man in a hood, his footsteps crunching through the ice. The dog's lips peeled back in silence, baring teeth stained pink at the gums. A warning. Not to me. For me. The moment stretched, thin as the ice over puddles. Then with a grunt he lowered his head back onto his paws, his exhale fogging the ground between us. Dismissed. I tightened my grip on my backpack strap, the one held together by duct tape and wishful thinking, and took a step back. The dog didn't lift his head again. Just let his eyes drift shut, his body curling tighter, like if he made himself small enough, the cold might forget him. Behind me, the M in the neon sign finally gave up, plunging half the alley into darkness. I walked away. But the weight of that look, that tired, furious spark, followed me all the way home. The cold that night was different. It didn't just bite. It gnawed, working its way through the holes in my sneakers and up the cuffs of my too-thin jacket. My breath came in visible bursts as I walked, each exhale carrying the faint metallic tang of the burger warming in my pocket. I told myself I was just taking a different route home, that the alley behind McDonald's was simply a shortcut. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. The dumpster's rusted hinges groaned as the wind bullied it back and forth, the sound like a wounded animal. And there he was. Same spot, same defensive curl of his body. But tonight his ears pricked at my approach. The neon light painted stripes across his fur, turning the gray patches blood red. I slowed my steps, my heartbeat suddenly loud in my ears. The burger wrapper crinkled as I pulled it from my pocket, the sound making his nostrils flare. Up close, the smell of him hit me. Wet dog, yes, but underneath that, something sour. Infection. My stomach twisted. Kneeling hurt. The concrete was slick with frozen grease, seeping cold through my jeans immediately. I unwrapped the burger slowly, the steam rising between us like a ghost. His eyes tracked every movement, but he didn't lift his head. Just watched. Always watching. Not poisoned, I muttered, then felt stupid. Like he could understand. Like he'd trust words even if he could. I tore the burger in half, the cheese stretching then snapping. The scent of onions and grease bloomed between us. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. But I tossed the larger half toward him anyway. It landed with a soft plop in the dirty snow, halfway between us. Nothing. No movement except the rapid twitch of his nose. The wind changed direction, carrying the food's scent back to me. My mouth watered traitorously. 1 minute passed. 2. My knees began to ache from the cold and pressure. Just as I started to think about standing, about leaving, a shift. Almost imperceptible. His front legs tensed. I held perfectly still, not even blinking. He uncurled with the careful precision of something that's been kicked too many times, each muscle moving separately. When he stood, I saw the injury properly for the first time. His left front paw held slightly off the ground, the fur around it matted dark. 3 steps forward. Pause. Head lowered, ears flat. Another step. The burger was still 6 inches from his nose when he stopped, his entire body vibrating with tension. His ribs stood out like the bars of a cage beneath his fur. A car backfired somewhere on the next block. He flinched so hard his claws scraped concrete, but his eyes never left mine. Testing. Waiting to see if I'd move, if I'd lunge. I looked away first, turning my head slightly to the side in what I hoped was a non-threatening gesture. When I glanced back, the burger was gone, and he was already retreating, moving backward without turning, his gait uneven but quick. The way he carried the food, not gulping it down, but holding it carefully in his front teeth, made something in my chest tighten. Just before he disappeared behind the dumpster, he paused. Just for a second. Just long enough to look back at me with those ancient, exhausted eyes. Then he was gone, leaving only the impression of his body in the snow and the wrapper fluttering near my knees. The wind snatched it away before I could grab it, sending it dancing down the alley like a broken promise. I stayed kneeling for another minute, listening to the quiet sounds of him eating back there. The small, quick bites of an animal used to guarding its meals. When I finally stood, my joints protested, stiff with cold. The walk home felt longer than usual, the burger heavy in my stomach despite being half its normal size. That night, lying in bed, I dreamed of ribs like prison bars and eyes that held entire galaxies of hurt. And when I woke with a start at 3 a.m., my first thought wasn't of school or work, or any of the usual worries. It was whether he'd still be there tomorrow. The snow fell like shattered glass, each flake catching the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights before disappearing into the growing white silence. My breath came in ragged bursts as I turned the corner into the alley, my sneakers leaving dark bruises in the fresh powder. I told myself I was just checking, just making sure. Then I saw him, curled tighter than a fist against the brick wall, his fur crusted with snow that hadn't melted. The dumpster's usual stench of rotting grease was muted tonight, buried under winter's clean scent. Only the sharp tang of urine broke through, his territorial marker, slowly being erased by the storm. "Hey," I whispered, my voice stolen by the wind. He didn't lift his head, just the faintest twitch of one ear, the barest acknowledgement that he knew I was there. The snow had formed tiny icicles along his whiskers, each breath making them tremble. His paws were visible now, raw and cracked, the pink pads turned angry red from frostbite and concrete. My own hands ached in sympathy, the scars on my knuckles from last winter's cold burning beneath my skin. I remembered that particular pain, the way it started as needles, then faded to numbness, then came roaring back when you finally found warmth. The kind of hurt that made you believe, just for a second, that no one would ever come for you. The backpack straps dug into my shoulders as I shrugged it off, the zipper's teeth catching on frozen fabric. Inside, beneath my algebra textbook and half-finished homework, the gray wool hat I'd pocketed from the thrift store donation bin waited. It smelled like mothballs and someone else's sweat, but it was thick. It was warm. Kneeling hurt more tonight. The cold had seeped up through the pavement, turning the concrete into a frozen palm pressing against my kneecaps. I held the hat out like a peace offering, letting the wind carry its scent toward him. His nose emerged first from the protective curl of his tail, twitching. Then one eye, the brown darker than the alley's shadows, the white around it shot through with red veins. We stared at each other across 18 inches of untouched snow, our breath mingling in the narrow space between us. Somewhere beyond the alley a siren wailed. His ears flattened against his skull, his body tensing to run despite the injury, despite the cold. I froze, the hat dangling from my fingers like a failed white flag. The moment stretched. The siren faded. Slowly, so slowly, I reached forward. The wool brushed his back first, catching on the ice-matted fur. He shuddered but didn't pull away. I let the hat drape over him like a shroud, like the blanket no one had ever thought to give me in those first nights at the group home. His warmth seeped through the fabric almost immediately, the heat of a body fighting to survive. I could feel the sharp ridges of his spine beneath my fingertips, the rapid flutter of his heartbeat. We stayed like that, suspended in the alley's dim light, two creatures who had learned the hard way that touch usually meant pain. Then, impossibly, a warmth against my thumb. His tongue, rough as sandpaper, and warmer than anything in that frozen alley, dragged once across my skin. A tentative gesture, a question. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The snow settled on my shoulders, on his makeshift blanket, on the space between us that suddenly felt smaller. When I finally pulled back, my knees screaming in protest, he didn't retreat. Just watched me with those ancient eyes as I stood, as I wiped my freezing nose on my sleeve, as I took one step backward toward the street. The hat shifted as he rearranged himself beneath it, tucking his injured paw closer to his body. His sigh fogged the air between us, carrying a sound almost like contentment. The walk home took twice as long through the storm. My ears burned with cold, my fingers numb in my pockets. But beneath my ribs, something warm and unfamiliar flickered to life. I'd been wrong before. Someone had come. The streetlights flickered like dying candles as we walked, casting our elongated shadows across the frozen pavement. He moved like smoke. There when I glanced back, gone when I turned to look properly. 10 paces behind always, his claws clicking a hesitant rhythm on the sidewalk, before going silent when he hit snow patches. "Ghost," I whispered to the night air. The name crystallized before me, then vanished. Perfect. He froze mid-step when he heard it, one paw suspended above the concrete. The neon glow from the bodega across the street painted his ribs in garish pink light as his sides heaved. We stood like that for 3 long breaths, me facing forward, him poised between approach and flight, before his paw finally touched down again. The radiator in my apartment building moaned like a wounded animal as we climbed the stairs. Ghost hesitated at each landing, his nose working overtime to process the smells. Stale beer, cat piss, the ghost of someone's long-ago fried chicken. His claws dug into the worn carpet when the elevator rattled to life somewhere in the building's guts. My door stuck on the third shove, the way it always did when the temperature dropped. The sudden screech of wood on wood made Ghost's entire body flinch backward, his injured paw lifting instinctively. I left the door open behind me, a silent invitation written in the wedge of yellow light spilling onto the hallway's dirty tiles. He took exactly 37 minutes to cross the threshold. I counted, pretending to read a water-stained magazine at the kitchen table. First, just his nose appeared, sniffing at the draft. Then one cautious paw. The floorboards creaked their protest beneath his weight, and he vanished again, a shadow retreating. When he finally entered fully, he did it sideways, body angled toward the exit at all times. My apartment wasn't much. A mattress on the floor, a hot plate balanced on an overturned milk crate, the persistent smell of damp socks no matter how often I washed them. Ghost circled the perimeter twice, his nose tracing the baseboards like he was memorizing escape routes. The radiator spat and hissed in the corner, giving off just enough heat to taunt us. He stopped by the door, his body forming a perfect comma between me and freedom. The wool hat lay between us like a peace treaty gone stale. Outside, a car alarm started its mechanical wail. Ghost's ears swiveled toward the sound, but his eyes never left mine. Dark pools reflecting the bare bulbs swinging above us. I busied myself making tea I wouldn't drink, the spoon clinking too loud against the mug. When I turned back, Ghost had lowered himself onto the hat. His body curled tight enough that I could count every vertebra pressing against his skin. His chin rested on his good paw, but his muscles remained tense, ready to spring. The radiator gave one last metallic groan before falling silent. I turned off the overhead light, leaving just the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. In the sudden half-dark, Ghost's breathing seemed louder, each exhale carrying the faintest whimper I wasn't sure I was meant to hear. I lay on the mattress facing the wall, counting the water stains in the ceiling plaster. Somewhere around 2 a.m., the sounds changed. The quiet shift of weight, the soft sigh of wool compressing. I didn't turn around. Didn't need to. The rhythm of his breathing told me everything. He'd finally lain down properly, his body curled around itself like a question mark. When I woke at dawn to the sound of Mrs. Kowalski's garbage cans clattering below, Ghost was already at the door, his ears pricked toward the hallway sounds. The hat lay between us, its fibers imprinted with the shape of his body. Our eyes met in the gray morning light. His wary, mine sleep softened. Neither of us moved. Outside, the city groaned to life. Inside, we remained perfectly still, two ghosts deciding whether to haunt the same space. The radiator kicked on with a shudder, spitting out a burst of warm air that carried the scent of wet dog and something almost like trust. The jingle of my keys became our secret language. I'd hear it before I even reached the door. The quiet scrape of claws on hardwood, the soft whomp of Ghost shifting from his spot by the radiator. By the time I turned the lock, he'd be sitting upright, ears pricked, tail giving that single solemn thud against the floor. Safe. Not welcome. Not happy. Just safe. Progress. The tennis ball appeared on a Tuesday. Rain had turned the alley into a shallow river, and when I came home, Ghost was waiting. Damp, muddy, something clenched in his teeth. He dropped it at my feet with a wet plop. The ball was ancient. Its green felt peeling, split along one seam. It smelled like gutter water and dead leaves. I picked it up between two fingers. "This for me?" Ghost sneezed. I left it on the windowsill, where the afternoon sun could dry it out. The next morning, it was gone. 2 days later, it reappeared in my shoe. We didn't play fetch, but sometimes, when I was doing homework at the table, I'd roll it gently across the floor. Ghost would watch it pass with the weary patience of a king tolerating a jester. Then, when I least expected it, he'd nose it back toward me. A conversation. The radio was our only luxury. a dented thing with a broken antenna that only caught static and one oldies station. I'd hum along to the crackling melodies, my voice rusty from disuse. Ghost's ears would flatten. He'd sigh like a put-upon professor, then retreat to the far corner with deliberate dignity. But he never left the room. Winter clung to the city like a starving animal. Nights were the worst, the wind screaming through the gaps in the window frame, the cold gnawing at the sheets. I'd lie awake, counting the ticks of the leaky faucet, trying to ignore the ache in my knuckles where last year's frostbite had left its marks. Then, one night, wait. I froze. Ghost's breath warmed my ankle through the thin blanket. His chin rested heavy on the mattress, his body a careful semicircle at the foot of the bed. Not touching, except for that one point of contact. Outside, the wind hurled itself against the building. The pipes groaned. Ghost's ribs expanded against my shin as he sighed. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Somewhere around 3 a.m., his breathing slowed, deepened. His paws twitched, dreaming. Dawn came gray and quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the world muffled under fresh snow. Ghost was gone from the bed, back in his spot by the door. But the blanket sagged where he'd been, the fabric still faintly warm. I made coffee. He watched. The tennis ball reappeared on my pillow that evening. Spring arrived in stolen moments, a patch of sunlight on the floor that lingered past noon, the scent of wet pavement replacing winter's metallic bite. Ghost's ribs had vanished beneath new muscle, his coat filling in sleek and dark, except for the silver tracing his muzzle. He no longer startled at slamming doors, no longer slept with one eye open. The collar sat in my pocket for a week before I worked up the nerve. It wasn't much, just a strip of red nylon from the dollar store, frayed at the edges where the stitching had loosened. The buckle clicked when I tested it, the sound too loud in our quiet apartment. I'd practiced the motion in secret, looping it around my wrist, adjusting the tightness, imagining how it would look against his fur. I waited until evening, when the light through the blinds painted everything gold. Ghost was sprawled on his side by the radiator, gnawing lazily at the tennis ball. His tail thumped once when I knelt beside him. I'm here. But his jaws kept working, peeling another strip of green fuzz loose. The collar smelled like plastic, and the cashier's lavender hand lotion. I held it out, letting him sniff. His nose wrinkled at the unfamiliar scent, but he didn't pull away. Just watched as I unfolded it, revealing the single word inked along the inner lining. Mine. Ghost went very still. Outside, a car backfired. His ears twitched, but his gaze stayed locked on the collar, on the word. I could see the calculations flickering behind his eyes. What does this mean? What do you want from me? Slowly, I reached for him. He didn't flinch, didn't tense. Just let my fingers brush the thick fur of his neck, his breath warm on my wrist. The nylon whispered as I threaded it beneath his chin. The buckles clicked like a key turning in a lock. Too tight? Too loose? My hands shook as I adjusted it, my thumbnail catching on the frayed edge. Ghost stood statue still, his pulse a steady drum against my fingertips. When I finally leaned back, he looked different. Not owned, not claimed, but seen. For 3 heartbeats, we just stared at each other. Then he shook himself violently, ears flapping, the collar's D-ring jingling like a tiny alarm. He sneezed, shook again, paused to glare at me as if I'd subjected him to some great indignity. I laughed, a rusty sound I barely recognized. Ghost huffed, but then he nudged my hand with his nose, his tongue flicking once against my palm. Again. I scratched the spot just behind the collar, where his fur grew thickest. His back leg thumped against the floorboards in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The red nylon stood out against his dark coat like a flag, like a declaration. Outside, the first true thunderstorm of spring rolled in. Rain lashed the windows, turning the glass into a liquid mirror. Ghost's reflection stared back at me. Solid, steady, his. I pressed my forehead to his and breathed him in. Dog and home and something infinitely fragile. The collar's tag jingled softly as he sighed, the sound swallowed by thunder. The knock came at golden hour. Ghost was asleep in his sunbeam when the sound cracked through our apartment. 3 sharp raps that sent him lurching upright, the red collar glinting as his head whipped toward the door. His lips peeled back in a silent snarl before he'd even fully woken. I knew before I opened it. The man standing in the hallway wore a police windbreaker too thin for early spring, the sleeves creased where they'd been rolled up. His badge gleamed dull in the dying light. The folder in his hands had my name typed neatly on the tab. Jacob Michael Reeves. No one had called me that in years. "Hey, Jake." His voice was softer than I expected. The kind you'd use for a spooked animal, or a kid about to bolt. "Mind if I come in?" Ghost pressed against my leg, his shoulder a solid weight against my knee. His growl vibrated through my bones. The officer's eyes dropped to him. "He bite?" "Only people who deserve it." A beat of silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, the officer's stance shifted, shoulders loosening, hands moving slower. He knew the language too. The apartment smelled like cheap coffee and the peanut butter sandwich I'd made Ghost an hour ago. The officer's gaze skimmed over the hot plate, the mattress on the floor, the tennis ball by the baseboard. His fingers tightened on the folder. "Your dad's out," he said. "Rehab stuck this time. He's got a job lined up." The words blurred. Outside, a car honked. Ghost's nose nudged my palm, wet and insistent. The officer was still talking, his mouth moving around phrases like fresh start and family counseling. My fingers found the Polaroid in my back pocket before I'd consciously decided to reach for it. The edges were worn soft from how often I'd taken it out to look. Ghost in his sunbeam, head pillowed on his paws, tail twitching in some dream chase, the collar bright against his fur. The officer paused when I held it out. For a long moment he just stared at the photo, then at the real Ghost. Alert now, ears pricked forward, watching the stranger in his space. "Tell him I'm not alone anymore," I said. Ghost leaned harder against me. The officer exhaled through his nose, the folder creaking as his grip shifted. When he reached for the photo, his fingers were careful not to brush mine. The silence stretched. Somewhere downstairs, Mrs. Kowalski's TV blared a game show. A burst of canned laughter seeped through the floorboards. The officer slid the photo into his breast pocket. It left a faint rectangular bulge over his heart. "He'll want to see you," he said finally. Ghost's tail thumped once against my leg. "I'm here." "I know," I said, to both of them. The officer nodded like I'd answered some unspoken question. At the door he hesitated, his hand on the knob. "That's a good dog," he said, so quiet I almost missed it. Sunlight slanted through the window, painting Ghost's collar molten. "Yeah," I said. "He is. We are not the cracks in our bones, the scars on our skin, or the nights we spent howling at the dark. We are the hands that didn't let go, the warmth that remained, the quiet, stubborn pulse that said, 'I am still here.'"